went to visit my friends at Burton Power to pick up something for Heidi, my hearing aid beige Model Mk2 Escort. John tells me this is a keeper, but
it's not for sale, but it can be sold.
Got a whole load of dismantling to do. Passenger side still had a gap. No turning back now. Seam sealer underneath the tunnel, and I've got a little bit on myself. Don't have to have the best Escort on the seam, you know, as long as you're building it how you want it and you're having fun, you know, that's what it's all about. In my recent DIY video, I mentioned that I went to visit my friends at Burton Power to pick up something for Heidi, my hearing aid beige Model Mk2 Escort. It's always cool going to pick up parts in person from Burton Power because they have a really cool shop filled with parts and engines on display, and the staff at Burton Power are always really helpful. I will leave all their links in the description. Definitely check them out if you're looking for any parts for your car, especially if you've got an old school Ford. Before I can fit the new part to Heidi, I'm going to need to do quite a lot of dismantling and a bit of butchery, and that's what I'm going to crack on with today. If you're a regular viewer of my content, click the like button now because it's a massive help. If you're new to the channel, click subscribe now and welcome. I'm Marcus Hayes, and today it's time to do something to Heidi that I always wish I did to Maud, my other Model Mk2 Escort. Give you a quick update on John's XR2 that a couple of you were talking about in the comments before. Since the last time we saw this thing, he's refurbed all the wheels. In fact, he was refurbing one of them the last time we saw this thing on the channel, and as you'll see, it's now got a red rocker cover. Really cool. Now, the idle solenoid that we changed before for another used one strangely failed like almost immediately, so John's now fitted a brand new one, and fingers crossed this will now stay running sweet. But yeah, this thing's awesome. John tells me this is a keeper, but we've heard that before. Everything's for sale for the right price.
It's not for sale, but it can be sold.
All right, so over here I've got said part that I picked up from my friends at Burton Power, and this is obviously a gearbox tunnel. There's the part number on Burton's website for anyone who's interested. But yeah, this is one of the things that I always wished that I fitted to Maud. I've had so much grief in the past, admittedly not recently, you know, touch wood, but yeah, with changing clutches and stuff on Maud, and because it's got a standard gearbox tunnel, you've basically got to drop the whole engine and gearbox down out of the car to get the gearbox off to change the clutch. So once I decided that this thing was going to be another drift toy, another, you know, Maud version 2 essentially, I decided that this thing's definitely going to be getting a large gearbox tunnel, and that's what I intend to fit in this video. Now, to fit the tunnel, I'm obviously going to need to remove the carpet, which means I'm going to need to remove the seats, I'm going to need to remove the heater box. So essentially, I'm going to need to strip out this whole interior again, but these interior bits are on eBay and hopefully they'll sell soon. I've said before that I'm useless at pricing things, so I think maybe I priced things a bit too expensive with the starting bids. I've actually dropped the starting bids on the seats and also the engine and gearbox package, which is also on eBay at the moment. And this is another thing that I intend to remove so that I can fit this gearbox tunnel. I was kind of thinking that I'll be able to leave the engine and gearbox in situ whilst I did the tunnel. As you can see, the gearbox is nowhere near the original tunnel, let alone where the new tunnel is going to be. It's probably going to come up to here. So I kind of thought that I'd be able to cut the old one out and weld the new one in with the engine and gearbox still in situ. But I think the sensible option is just to move everything out of the way to make the job easier. That'll also give me the opportunity to remove this servo and master cylinder arrangement, which I haven't yet listed on eBay, but I will be soon. So yeah, essentially got a whole load of dismantling to do. So let's cue some music and crack on with it. First to be removed were the seats, which was really simple because they weren't bolted down properly. I stacked everything on top of Maud, who makes a great table. Me and John then removed Heidi's carpet and the centre console brackets, and then the switch panel and the heater box. I could then trial fit the tunnel for the first time, and I was really impressed, so it was time to dive into removing Heidi's running gear. I got her jacked up, removed her prop shaft, which was really simple because there was no diff fitted. Then I disconnected the clutch cable, took the weight of the gearbox with the jack, and once I'd removed the starter motor, I removed the bell housing bolts, undone the gearbox mount, and then removed the gearbox. It wasn't long before I had the engine removed as well, which I just lowered down onto a trolley. I got Heidi back on the ground, and then I set about removing some other bits in the engine bay that I'm not going to need, like the ignition coil and the starter motor solenoid. These bits can be thrown on eBay, as well as the servo and master cylinder, which was the next thing to be removed. And there it was, Heidi's interior and her engine bay were now empty again. All right, into a new day, and today is running away from me a bit, to be honest. It's already almost 4 p.m, so I need to get cracking. On the way round here today, I picked up 2 cans of Cordoba beige spray paint, because once I've fitted this large tunnel, I'm obviously going to need to paint it beige, but also, now that this thing's going to be a stripped out drift toy, I'm going to need to paint the inside of the roof skin. When I painted the interior, I basically only went up to as far as I needed to, because this was going to have a headline. Now, a big part of me was considering respraying this interior, because as you can see, the paint isn't quite as shiny as the rattle cans that I used in Heidi's boot, which are awesome. I got those rattle cans from my friends at BODICRAFT in Watford, of course. I'll leave a link to their website in the description. So yeah, I was considering redoing this interior with the BODICRAFT paint, but I've decided not to do that. Maybe I'll revisit it if I end up putting a roll cage in this at some point, because if I was going to repaint this interior, I'd want to get rid of all this sound deadening, and I feel like that's going to be a can of worms that I don't want to open up right now. So because this paint is the same paint that I used to do the rest of the interior, this should tie in nicely. You know, it won't be super shiny, but it'll be absolutely fine for now. So it's time to set about butchering Heidi's floor so that I can fit this new large tunnel, and whilst I'm doing this, I want to learn some lessons that I learnt when I put a large tunnel in ESTA, my Mark 1 Escort. Now, I've got to say, I am very happy with how this tunnel looks like it's going to fit already. When I picked it up and I saw that this bit was really curved, I kind of assumed that that was going to be way more the wrong shape than it is. When I did ESTA's tunnel, the tunnel actually came with sort of flange pieces all the way around, you know, like these bits. But because the shape wasn't anything like the shape of the bulkhead, I ended up having to basically modify the front of the tunnel to follow the shape of the bulkhead, which then meant that ultimately, you know, the front of the tunnel was cut off, and then I ended up with a more narrow tunnel than I otherwise would have. You know, I basically used from here back rather than the whole front. And that's because when I fitted the tunnel to ESTA, the whole car was already painted, and I was trying to not disturb as much of the paintwork as possible, if that makes sense. So yeah, I was making the tunnel fit the car rather than sort of bashing the bulkhead and stuff to meet the tunnel, which meant that the tunnel ended up being smaller than it otherwise would have been. Now, obviously, Heidi's going to be getting a Type 9 gearbox, which is a lot smaller than the Mazda 6-speed that's in ESTA, but I still want to learn from what I learned when I did ESTA's tunnel. So I'm not going to be scared to bash the bulkhead about if I need to meet the tunnel when the time comes, even if it means, you know, I'm going to have to do way more touching up of the paint in here. And what I learned when I actually touched up the paint on ESTA's tunnel is that when you're running an ST170 engine, it's all hidden by engine anyway. So when Heidi has her ST170 fitted, you're not going to see, you know, any of the area that's gonna, you know, need to be touched up with paint and sealer and whatnot after I've fitted the tunnel. Now, one bit of the new tunnel that I'm not going to be able to complete until I get the gearbox fitted is this area where the gear stick's going to come through. I think the hole needs to be roughly here, a bit further back than the hole is currently for the 4-speed. So yeah, that'll have to be finalised when I've actually got the gearbox in, and then I can, you know, get it in exactly the right place. But I'll still go ahead and, you know, paint this new tunnel and stuff, and then when the time comes, I'll cut the hole, maybe end up putting like a piece of trim in there, sort of a gator sort of lip or whatever, and then just touch bits up if I need to. So with all that being said, this is going to be one of those jobs where I very much need to just dive in, use my brain as much as I can, and yeah, make it up as I go along. So let's crack on with it. I was going to start by trying to make the front of the tunnel fit a bit better to the bulkhead. So I marked out where I was going to start grinding, and then it was just a case of trial and error, grinding and refitting. I ended up getting the driver's side fitting really well, but the passenger side still had a gap. I did notice though that the bulkhead on the passenger side kind of kicks out, and I do plan to bash this bit about to clear the water rail on the ST170 lump. I drew round the new tunnel with a Sharpie, then with the tunnel out of the way, I marked my cut line about 1.5 inches in from the original mark. It was time to get butchering with my angle grinder at first. I made a few slits in strategic places so that I had some spots where I could start cutting with my reciprocating saw. There were a couple of other spots I needed to do with the grinder, but it wasn't long until the tunnel was out. No turning back now. I set about removing some of the sound deadening around where the new tunnel was going to be welded in. And then I used a wire brush on a drill to clean any remaining sound deadening. I hammered the flanges on the new tunnel flat before screwing the new tunnel in, and then it was time to get Heidi jacked up to see how well the tunnel fits underneath. These areas here are the areas where there's already a flange on the new tunnel, but in these areas I was going to create my own flange with the bulkhead material, and I was going to need to bash the remains of the rear of the original tunnel to meet the new tunnel. I used my tin snips to create slits in the bulkhead material to make it easier to bash them round to meet the new tunnel. My good friend Rob helped me with the passenger side by holding a hammer inside whilst I created the necessary crease. It wasn't the tidiest, but it'll do. I decided to cut a bit more material off of the back of the original tunnel. This is going to create more clearance and make life easier when I fit the Type 9. Out came the hammers to close the gaps, and then I got the grinder out to start cleaning things up. I used a Sharpie to start marking the areas on the tunnel where metal was overlapped. Then I removed the new tunnel and started cleaning up the areas on the car a bit more thoroughly, and I had to remove some more sound deadening at the back. Some areas that I couldn't get in with a grinder, I used a wire brush and a drill instead. Then I grabbed the weld through primer from my friends at BODICRAFT in Watford and covered all the bare metal areas. Don't forget to use code MH10 for 10% off of everything at BODICRAFT. Unfortunately, the weather turned, so I had to cover Heidi up. But I carried on working inside the garage by cleaning up all the areas on the tunnel that are going to be near where the welds are going to be. Then I coated those areas with the weld through primer, and the weather improved. Once the primer was dry, I screwed the tunnel in with even more screws this time, and then it was time to start welding. I put welds on the inside of the cockpit, just where my screws were, banging down the metal where needed to close any gaps. Then I went underneath to add tacks to the front of the tunnel where I'd created my own flange. Then, after a bit more bashing about, I fully welded the rear end of the new tunnel and then added some more welds to the front of the tunnel underneath. Back inside the car, I could see that my welds from underneath had penetrated, which was good. So then I just cracked on with fully welding the rest on the inside. And there it was. Heidi's new tunnel was stitched in, but there was still loads of work to do. The next day, I started grinding down the welds. Then I hit the welds with a wire brush on a drill to get rid of all the burn marks. Then I used an 80 grit disc to key up the metal of the new tunnel. At this point, the tunnel was ready for some paint products, but that'll have to wait for a minute. Back under the car, I used my tin snips and my hammer to tidy some bits up, and I used the grinder to trim off some excess. I then attacked some more welds with the grinder and the wire brush and the drill before DA sanding the underside of the tunnel to key it up. I grabbed the epoxy primer from my friends at Kent Europe and coated the underside of the tunnel, and this marked the start of the more satisfying bits of this job. Alright, so this job has definitely been a bit of a mission. I mean, it is quite a big job, but what's been holding me up more than anything is the fact that I'm really busy in other areas of my life, which means I've been getting around here, you know, really late on the 4 days that I have been around here. Today was going to be an exception, but when I got here and jacked the car up, I realised that I'd left my camera bag at home, so I had to whiz back home, grab that and then come back around here, and I live like 40 minutes away from this garage, so that was a significant delay, but we are where we are and the tunnel is now welded in. I'm not saying it's a great welding job, maybe I could have put a few more welds on it. I definitely think that maybe I should have turned the welder up a little bit, but when I was messing around with the settings whilst I was doing the job, I found that if I had the welder turned up much more, it would end up burning the car metal but not the tunnel metal. So maybe the tunnel material is slightly thicker than, you know, the material that these floor pans have been made out of. I don't know. But, you know, we've got penetration. I actually added a few more welds over here off camera a little while ago. Over here, the penetration isn't brilliant, but there is some penetration at least. And at the end of the day, these whole cars are put together with tiny spot welds, so I'm sure my little bodge up stitch job will be good enough. It's not gonna fall out, that's for sure. And with the amount of sealer that I'm planning to chuck on this job, that'll add a little bit more strength, I'm sure. Now, the underneath, as you would have just seen, is a bit further along because it's actually in epoxy primer. Once that dries, I can start chucking sealer in there. And the reason I haven't gone any further with the inside is because I want to tackle this at the same time. So yeah, I need to get the remains of this furry stuff off of the inside of the roof skin, and then it looks like where the glue has been, it's either a trace of glue or rust where the glue has been. So yeah, that's going to need to be at least extensively tickled, and yeah, then I can degrease the inside of the roof, give it a coat of primer, and then I'll be able to paint that when I paint the tunnel. So yeah, let's crack on with this. I was able to scrape most of the furry stuff off of the roof with a scraper. Then I went over the whole thing with my DA sander. There was a couple of rust scabs around the edges that needed to be hit with the wire brush on a drill, and then I sanded the paint around the edges to key it up. The roof was now a lot smoother, so hopefully the paint will come out half decent. I bashed the outside of the roof skin to remove any loose dust, and then chucked on a light coat of epoxy primer. After sweeping and hoovering Heidi's cockpit, I gave the new tunnel a coat of the epoxy primer. Then I grabbed the Kent Europe seam sealer and smothered it over all the welds underneath the tunnel, and I got a little bit on myself. Then I repeated the process inside, trying to keep it as neat as I could. Out came the beige paint to give the roof skin its first coat. Then I did a bit of masking and put some epoxy on all the sealer. Out came the rubber guard next to coat the underside of the tunnel. This stuff can be painted body colour, but I'm not going to bother. It was then finally time to paint Heidi's new tunnel, and the satisfaction I was getting at this stage of the job was unreal. It was awesome to see it turning Cordoba beige. Then it was just a case of giving the roof and the tunnel a second coat, and then I could finally stand back and observe what I'd achieved. Not bad for an unskilled idiot. Alright, excuse the microphone hanging off my ear, as you would have seen in the clips. I ruined a t-shirt by leaning on the sealer. But yeah, we now have a conclusion to this job. Tunnel's looking awesome now that it's beige. This paint will matte off a bit, and it'll be, you know, like this other paint that I did the interior with. Not quite as shiny as the paint that I used in the boot and stuff. But yeah, it will tie in nicely, and yeah, so glad to get this done. Inside of the roof is looking a lot better now it's beige, but you know, it's never going to look great because I never, you know, fully smoothed out the marks that were left by the glue, but that's absolutely fine. That's the beauty of building these cars into, you know, just a drift toy. You don't have to make everything exactly perfect, and that's what I really enjoyed about building Maud. Although, you know, I just want to make this one you know, she's going to look a lot better than Maud did. But yeah, I'm sort of attacking things with the same principle, you know. Things don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have the best Escort on the scene, you know. As long as you're building it how you want it and you're having fun, and ultimately it's going to be a load of fun to drive, you know, that's what it's all about. And yeah, now this thing's got a large tunnel, it means that it's going to be better than Maud in the way that I'm going to be able to change the clutches super quick, just like I can with this old banger. Because clutches do get abused a lot with drift toys. Now, I'm sure there's going to be loads of bits that I'm probably going to need to wipe with thinners, you know, to like overspray and stuff, probably on the A-pillars that I'd already satin blacked. You know, I might have to wipe off some beige paint. That's absolutely fine. I've noticed on this bulkhead, I'm definitely going to need to do some touching up with the beige, because the rubber guard, you know, I didn't want that to encroach too much into the engine bay. I've noticed there's a bit of a crack in the paint here, but you know, that's because we were doing a load of bashing about, you know, before we welded the tunnel in, so that's absolutely fine. You know, bits are going to need to be touched up, and in fact, in the next video that I do on this thing, I'm going to be doing some more improvements to the engine bay, which is going to involve a bit of butchery. So yeah, things are going to need to be touched up, you know, in terms of the paint anyway. So that's absolutely fine. As I think I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I didn't want to be scared this time to ruin the paintwork in the engine bay, and make the tunnel job not as good, which was the mistake that I made with Esther's tunnel, and then ultimately I had to enlarge the tunnel further later on. So yeah, quite happy to do any little bits of touch up on the paint as necessary. And as I've already mentioned in this video, ultimately when there's an ST170 lump in this thing, you're not going to see any of this anyway. So yeah, it's absolutely fine. And yeah, with the rubber guard coating on the underside, and that's a nice tough coating. So as I say, next video that I do on this thing, I'm going to be diving into those bits in the engine bay. Yeah, sort of some improvements and modifications that I've never done before. So yeah, looking forward to that. But in the meantime, between now and then, I'm going to try and spend some more time on this endless filler work on the rear quarters. I mean, they're getting there, but yeah, I just keep having to throw more and more skims in, partly because, you know, I'm not a bodywork man at all. I'm a complete amateur, and I'm probably putting too much filler in, which is then meaning that I need to put more labour into sanding, and then I'm probably sanding too much out, which then means I need to put more in. So yeah, a professional will be able to do it in less skims, but I'm not a professional. I'm just a trier. But I'm sure I'll get there with this thing, and it will look half decent once the filler work is done and it's ultimately painted. Now, I've been listing things on eBay that I've been selling, you know, parts that I don't need for Heidi anymore, and some other bits. And yeah, loads of people have been in touch asking when Maud's shell is going to be for sale. Now, it's not going to be for a long time. I'm going to want to strip her completely, sell all the parts individually, or keep anything that I do for spares, as I already mentioned in a video. And to be honest, I'm actually thinking that I might drive Maud through one more winter. Now, it's getting late in the year now. If I can't get Heidi painted within the next month or so, then realistically, I'm probably better off waiting until spring. So we'll just see how it goes. But whatever happens, if and when Maud's shell is ever for sale, I will put it all over social media. I will announce it on the channel, so don't worry, you're not going to miss out as long as you're following me on here and on my social media. But yeah, I'm already thinking when the time comes to get this whole car painted except for the wings, I'm already thinking that I could, you know, sort of fettle with those and get those to fit better, and then paint them separate because they're going to be bolt on anyway. And I can't think about getting this thing primered and painted until I get this front passenger door back, which has been with my good friend Inky for ages now, but it's absolutely fine. I've told him, you know, no rush with the job, but basically he's going to try and, you know, make one good door out of two. And I'm actually probably going to go down to Inky's Autos this weekend and just have a go at least starting that job myself, but do it at Inky's, so he's at least there to sort of give me some guidance. So yeah, that means that I might be actually getting this door back relatively soon, but we'll see. But yeah, if I do get that door back soon, then there might be a possibility of getting the whole car except for the front wings in 2-pack primer soon, and then maybe I might be able to get Heidi painted very soon, apart from the front wings, as I say. before the weather gets too cold. But my good friend Rob, who I'm hoping is gonna, you know, I'll say do the paintwork, but I'm probably going to end up doing it myself, but in his shop. But he's a very busy man as well, so I've got to work around him. So, you know, a few things have got to fall into place if I am going to be able to get this thing painted before the really cold weather comes. But, you know, we'll just see. You know, until then, I'll just keep plodding away. I've still got bits to do, and then we'll just see if things work out that way. But there you go. Yeah, I'll just give you one more look at this huge beige tunnel. One more look at her beige inner roof skin. And with that, I need to pack up and get out of here. It's starting to get dark earlier now. The days are getting shorter, so that's going to affect what I can get done moving forward. But, you know, we can't control these things. Pretty annoyed that I'm missing a boxing session again tonight, but I just had to finish this video and get it out. I've been really trying to, you know, keep the videos coming out regularly, you know, just keep on the grind. And yeah, this video has been, you know, quite a few days since the last one. So yeah, happy to finish the video. And yeah, hopefully the next one won't be too long, you know, hopefully just a few days. So as always, massive thanks to everyone who's tuned into this video. Do give it a thumbs up if you thought it was any good. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. It's absolutely fine. Check the links in the description to follow me on social media. My email address is down there, along with a link to my website and the Petrolhead Style website. Huge thanks as always to my patrons for your ongoing support. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.